On November 9th, 1975, half of the entire Soviet Baltic Fleet was suddenly placed on high alert. Their orders? Hunt down and stop the Soviet destroyer Storozhevoy by any means necessary. Earlier that evening, the ship had been seized from its captain by its Zampolit, Valery Mikhaylovich Sablin. The political commissar was leading a mutiny and had redirected the ship full speed towards Sweden. It was to be a real-life hunt for Red October. The USSR was celebrating the 58th anniversary of the Russian Revolution in November of 1975. Several vessels had been moored on the east banks of the Daugava River so they could take part in the celebrations hosted by Riga, the capital city of the Latvian Soviet Socialist Republic. Among these ships was the Storozhevoy destroyer, which welcomed civilian tourists during the day as part of the festivities. Each of these ships carried a Zampolit aboard, an updated iteration of the pre-World War II political commissars. The Zampolit were high-ranking but subordinate to their commanding officer. They also responded to a different chain of command within the political system. The Zampolit worked as informants on the morale and actions of personnel and had the obligation of maintaining the crews in a pro-Soviet, pro-communist frame of mind. These officers were recruited from the army, mainly when they exhibited communist purity fanaticism. They were then sent to Kiev to train for both military and political obligations. Once they were assigned to a ship, they were the third officer in command after the commanding officer and his senior assistant. While being a high-ranking position, these officers also enjoyed the benefits of having open conversations with soldiers about ideology, and in many cases, worked as advocates for the sailors and their welfare. As a result, most Zampolit were both respected and well-liked by crew members. While some of the crew members on the Storozhevoy left the ship to explore Riga, Zampolit Valery Mikhaylovich Sablin remained behind to plan a mutiny. Captain of the third rank, Valery Mikhaylovich Sablin's purpose for taking over the Storozhevoy destroyer has been contested at times, with two main versions standing. The most prevalent account claims that Sablin wanted to make a statement against Soviet Premier Leonid Brezhnev. The other version holds that he was trying to defect from the Union. The first account of his motivations holds that his goal was to seize the vessel to sail it out of the Bay of Riga to Leningrad. There he would stop by the moored museum cruiser Aurora, famous among the Soviets as a symbol of the people's struggle. From Aurora, he would broadcast an address to the nation, calling for a return to original communist values. The speech would go into criticism of Premier Leonid Brezhnev because of his spending on military ventures and his cancellation of political reforms. According to this version of the plan, Sablin wanted to ask the nation to fight corruption and demagoguery through a revival of Leninist political theory and ideology. The alternative version holds that Sablin had conspired with a few crew members under an elaborate lie to defect from the USSR. Under this account of events, it's believed that he planned on sailing the ship to Gotland, the Swedish island, by traveling through the Irben Sound for 5.5 hours, moving at 33 knots. Once there, he would ask the Swedes for political asylum. Either way, Zampolit Sablin knew that the holiday distractions could give him a head start, especially if he set out while the other officers were asleep. As evening fell on November 9th, 1976, Sablin launched his takeover plan. He told Captain Anatoly Potulny that multiple officers were worryingly intoxicated below deck in the sonar compartment. Once he entered the empty compartment, he was locked in, and Sablin reportedly stated, quote, "Sorry, I could not do otherwise. Once we arrive at our destination, you will be allowed to choose your destiny." Soon after, Sablin summoned all the senior officers for a meeting. They voted on whether or not to support the mutiny. Out of 15 officers, 8 supported him. The other 7 were locked in below the main deck. After securing officer support, Sablin's second part of the plan went into motion. He called on all the crew members aboard, around 145 to 155 men, to deliver an effective speech that gained him all their support. Among other things, he stated, quote, "The leadership of the party and the Soviet government have abandoned the principles of the revolution. There is no freedom nor justice. The only way out is a new communist revolution. It's assumed that the current state apparatus will be cleared away and some of its institutions broken up and cast into the dustbin of history. Will these issues be addressed through the dictatorship of the proletariat class? Necessarily. Only through the greatest national vigilance is there a path to a society of happiness." Although Sablin had gained control of the ship and the commanding officer was held captive, not everyone was in favor of the mutiny. One of the sailors who supported him during the mutiny used the chaos and darkness to slip into the water. Knowing he didn't have much time since he risked detection with every passing minute, Sablin chose to leave Riga immediately under the cover of night, rather than departing from the fleet during the day as he had planned. The radar was turned off so their peers wouldn't be alerted to their movement. As the Storozhevoy took off, the escaped mutineer arrived on the island, cold and wet from swimming in November waters. His first attempt at hitchhiking a ride to a naval base failed, since drivers assumed he was a drunk sailor and preferred not to put themselves at risk. He couldn't use public transportation since the festivities had disrupted the times and frequencies of rides. The conscript gained hope when he was able to contact the officer on duty at the Bulgaria naval base from a public phone. He asked to be picked up so he could share vital information in person. Instead, he was ignored, assumed to either be a prank caller or a drunk sailor wanting a free ride. The sailor was unable to do anything other than walk to the Riga naval headquarters. By the time he had arrived, Sablin had been sailing the Storozhevoy for around 2 hours. At the headquarters, the soldier was listened to but not taken too seriously. In response to his claims, there were unsuccessful attempts to establish contact with the vessel. Rear Admiral Varenkin, who was in command, was still not taking the sailor's words seriously when an emergency frequency broadcasted the message, quote, "Mutiny on board the Storozhevoy. We are heading for open sea." The message was sent either by an officer who wiggled to freedom or by an unwilling co-conspirator. The message, as well as all subsequent radio communications regarding the mutiny, were accessible to the Swedish armed forces uncoded. Whether Sablin's destination was Leningrad or Gotland, the Storozhevoy needed to travel into the Baltic Sea. The vessel, which had been in service for less than 18 months, was one of the Soviet Union's most advanced frigates from the Burevestnik class. The ship was created to attack enemy submarines from 50 miles away using short-range rockets and long-range missiles. Losing the ship to Sweden could unveil military secrets and counter any advantage that the expensive new vessel had provided up to then. Admiral Varenkin reached out over radio, asking Sablin to turn around, and even promised full forgiveness for him and the crew. The Admiral received no response. As the Baltic Fleet detected the passing ship, they realized its crew may be defecting. After failed appeals to Sablin, Premier Brezhnev had to be awoken at 4 a.m. The Soviet leader proceeded to greenlight using as much force as necessary to prevent the ship from entering Swedish waters. The Riga and Liepaja harbors sent 11 fast-track boats after the frigate. The Soviet Navy sent IL-38 turboprop patrol aircraft and Tu-16 bombers as well. The Soviet Air Force sent several intimidating Yakovlev Yak-28 planes, each carrying 4 unguided bombs. By the end of the pursuit, a total of 60 warplanes were sent to pursue the frigate, along with half of the Baltic Fleet. The journey was proving to be challenging for Sablin due to poor visibility caused by dense fog. On the other hand, the silent ship was easily concealed in it. In an attempt to avoid a potential accident with another ship, Sablin decided to turn on the radar as they went past the Irben Strait. The Yakovlev planes attacked at that location after they were alerted of the ship's presence by a lighthouse. Unfortunately, Storozhevoy had sailed past, and their bombs actually hit a Soviet freighter on its way to Finland. With the runaway ship's radar emitting a signal, it was easier for the Soviet team to locate it. By 8 in the morning, the Tu-16s had closed in on Storozhevoy. They were armed with Kingfish cruise missiles and ready to shoot. However, the Soviet frigate was crossing international waters. The Swedes listened in to Soviet radio traffic as the Air Force and Navy consulted within and with each other as to how they should proceed. Some pilots were ordered to engage but refused. Perhaps out of fear they could accidentally hit a foreign vessel, or perhaps because they did not want to shoot comrades. Some of them were being cautious after making the mistake with the freighter by the Irba Strait. The 36 Yakovlev Yik-28 planes and 2 boats carrying P-15 anti-ship missiles also closed in on the rogue ship. The pilot of one of the Yik-28s was the first to strike, delivering several shells to the port side of the vessel. The crew of Storozhevoy never shot back. Soon bombs started dropping from the sky around the ship. One FAB-250 hit the stern, damaging the steering gear to a halt and tearing off the rear deck cover. As water entered the ship, it began circling and stopped moving only 50 nautical miles away from Swedish national waters. Cornered on the outside, it did not take long for Sablin to be cornered inside the ship. 3 sailors liberated Captain Potolny in light of how things progressed. The captain then shot Sablin in one leg. One of the Yik-28s was diving to attack and, in error, gave some friendly fire to one of the pursuing Soviet ships. In return, that ship shot up at the plane. Neither sustained damage from the accidental altercation. The attacks were halted when all the pursuers received a radio message from Captain Potolny at 10:32 a.m. saying, quote, "I have taken control." Aside from Sablin's leg, none of the Storozhevoy crew members were injured during the fight. They were all arrested and interrogated during the recapture of the ship. The investigation found Sablin and his second-in-command, Alexander Sheen, as solely responsible. Both were tried and convicted. Sheen had to spend 8 years in prison. Sablin faced much harsher consequences after he was convicted of high treason. The rest of the mutineer crew members were dishonorably discharged. The Storozhevoy destroyer, with a new crew, was in service until the late 1990s, and the Russian Federation sold it to India for scrap. Its story was revisited by Western student Gregory D. Young for his master's thesis. Tom Clancy found the thesis at the United States Naval Academy Archives and was inspired to write the book that jump-started his career, The Hunt for Red October.